Tammy, have you hit record?
I did.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Myra Snell, and I'm a math professor at Los Medanos College and co-founder of the California Acceleration Project. I want to welcome you to our fall webinar series, which is titled Teaching Matters for Equity. And this is the first webinar in that series. I'm first going to give a few logistics, which is we have over 200 people registered for this event. So we're not going to be using the chat function. We're using Q&A. If you haven't used the Q&A function before, you'll see that that option to enter a question in the bottom menu. And once you enter a question, it does not appear to the rest of the audience until it is answered. So we will have people answering questions in writing, at which point everyone sees the question and the response, or we'll have people answering verbally, at which point the audience will see the question and then hear the response. We are recording today, and the recording and the slides will be posted on the California Acceleration Project website under publications, and I will also email everyone in about a week access to the recording. All right, so by way of introduction, I want to say that this presentation and report are really timely because they focus on factors that are associated with strong and equitable outcomes in transfer level math. And this is at a time when almost all students in our system begin in transfer level math. So over the last 4 years, as we all know, our system has focused on structural reforms as an equity strategy. And we can be proud of the work our colleges have done to transform our placement policies and our remediation practices, because these changes have produced historic transfer level math completion gains for our Black and Hispanic students. In fact, these are gains that I never even dreamed possible 12 years ago. For example, relative to 2015, our system has more than tripled the percentage of Black and Hispanic students that complete transfer level math within a year of their first math enrollment. And in fact, in 2019, which was the first year of implementation of AB 705, Black and Hispanic students completed transfer level math at rates that exceeded the completion rates of whites 4 years prior. And this remains the case every year since then. But because white and Asian students have also experienced large gains from these reforms, racial equity gaps remain. So at this point, our equity strategies for achieving strong math outcomes must focus on the transfer level math classroom and the learning environments that we create there. This presentation and the associated report provide new insights into the role of faculty and the role of our instructional practices in explaining student success in transfer level math. So without further ado, let's get started, and I'll hand things over to Mina Dagger.
Thank you, Myra. I would like to introduce our panelists, if you would advance, please. So we are so fortunate to be joined by a group of presenters today, some of whom are my fellow researchers, Michelle Hodara and Sam Riggs, and some of whom are experts from colleges that we've been working with. We have faculty and administrators, Analinda Arroyo, Bree Hayes, Linda Hitzman, Tammy Marshalls. So in terms of what we're going to do with our remaining time, we're going to start by sharing our findings from the research. We're going to share what factors contribute to student success in Gateway Math. We have a lot of detail on that. The short answer is faculty are the most important factor in determining student success in Gateway Math courses. But we're going to get details on a host of variables that really matter. And because faculty are so important, we also examine the role of specific instructional strategies used in math classrooms. So you will hear about that. I want to quickly acknowledge the 4 colleges that we've been working with. Their innovations, the great work they've been doing, have allowed us to examine what is effective, and now we're excited to share that back. Once we hear about instructional strategies, we're going to have a panel with faculty and administrators and hear exactly what instructional practices that we are saying are evidence-based, what do they look like on the ground in the classroom? And then how do we actually institutionalize evidence-based instructional practices in math? So one more acknowledgement before I proceed. I want to acknowledge Myra Snell of CAP for not just this webinar, but for providing input into all aspects of the project. We had many advisors, both research experts and practitioners, and we're grateful to them. And the funding for this project was provided by College Futures Foundation, so we're grateful for them to that also. So next, my colleague Michelle Wadara will be explaining what do we know from research evidence so far outside of this study about why instructional practices really matter.
Thank you, Mina. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's so nice to see so many people. So I'm going to very briefly share the research that has guided and informed our study. So first of all, much of higher education research on student success has focused on the influence of student characteristics and prior academic achievement, with much less attention to instructors and instructional practice. So there are many studies that have found high school GPA is a powerful predictor of student success in college. And we also explore the association between students' background characteristics and prior academic achievement and their math success. But in this study, we also explore the influence of faculty and instructional practice. We know that instructional practice matters for student success, and research has demonstrated this. Hebert and Gross have a really nice quote from one of their studies. The nature of classroom mathematics teaching significantly affects the nature and level of students' learning. And there's also a number of studies from the K-12 setting that have found having an effective teacher has a large positive effect on student outcomes. So there's a lot of research, there's a large research base out there on various instructional practices associated with positive student outcomes in mathematics, especially from the K-12 literature. And in this study, we draw on that literature and investigate the influence of 4 research-based instructional practice domains on student success. And later in this presentation, we'll share what those domains are, and we'll talk about which ones had an influence on student completion of transfer level math. And then our faculty presenters will discuss what it looks like in practice. And finally, the last point I want to make is we know from really, again, K-12 research that changing educational practices requires really high quality professional learning that is aligned and coherent with everyday teaching practice, and includes collaboration, mentorship, and opportunities for practice. And so later in this presentation, we'll hear from faculty and administrators about professional learning that helped institutionalize effective instructional practices that contribute to student success. So thank you for joining us again, and I'm going to turn it over to Sam to share our findings from the study.
All right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining. We're really excited to share what we've learned and to have this conversation. So to step back a little bit and repeat some of what's been said, our study looked at the role of math instructors and instructional practices in determining student success in transfer-level math courses. The full sample that we work with includes over 22,000 students who were enrolled in 704 transfer-level math courses taught by 159 faculty across 4 California community colleges between the winter 2020 and spring 2022 academic terms. We do a subset of analyses that focus on spring 2022, and we'll talk more about that later on. That includes about 3,700 students in 185 courses that we were able to match with course syllabi and surveys of those faculty to learn more about the instructional practices that are used in those classes. So the 2 main findings from this work are that math faculty are the most important factor in determining a student's successful completion of a transfer-level math course, and that there are specific instructional practices that can be used to reduce racial disparities that we observe in transfer-level math course outcomes. So before kind of going more into the findings, I'll give a little bit of context to our sample and to our data. So we looked at course type in transfer level math, and we had gateway math for business, quantitative reasoning, pre-calculus, college algebra, and statistics courses that were considered transfer level math courses across the 4 colleges. And as you can see, the vast majority of these courses were in statistics, 58%. The majority of the students enrolled in transfer level math courses in our sample identify as Hispanic Latino, 51%, followed by 19% who identify as Asian, just under 19% identifying as white, under 5% identifying as Black, under 4% or 4% identifying as multiracial, and around 1% that we did not have race ethnicity information for. And so as Myra shared at the beginning, when we look at the pass rates in our data across type of transfer level course and by student race ethnicity, we observe really large gaps in those pass rate outcomes. And so we see that Black and Latino students are passing transfer level math courses at much lower rates than their peers. And we observe this in our sample overall and across all types of transfer level courses. So let's sort of pivot and look at what contributes to student success in these courses. To give a brief overview of sort of the methods behind what we do, I'll show next. We estimated a series of multi-level regression models, so accounting for sort of the nested nature of our data of students within classes, within colleges. And the primary outcome that we are focused on is whether or not a student passes that transfer level course with a grade of C or higher. The models we estimate include a full set of explanatory variables. I'll show more detail on these on the next slide, but this includes variables capturing student demographic information, prior academic preparation, information about the high school a student attended, the attributes of the transfer level course, and an indicator for the student's instructor. And in this first set of analysis, our primary focus is on the adjusted R-squared values for the models, which gives us an understanding of how much variation in the outcome can be explained by that set of explanatory variables. So for a little more detail on what those explanatory variables include, so when we look at student demographics, we're including student age, disability status, eligibility for a California College Promise Grant as a proxy for income, student gender, race ethnicity, and veteran status. Our measures for prior academic preparation include a student's high school GPA and whether or not the student has enrolled in a transfer level math course in a prior term. We include an indicator variable for the student's high school. So we're accounting for sort of all attributes that are common across students attending that high school, both which could beyond just the high school itself, strongly be correlated with socioeconomic status and with academic preparation. We include information about the course, specifically the course length in weeks, the size of the class, and the course type. A question that we've had, and I'm sure you're thinking, is where is course modality? And due to the timing of our study, the data on course modality weren't consistent in a way that we could look at that. And so there's some robustness checks we do around that we can discuss. But if you notice that wasn't on the list, I just wanted to sort of flag that. And then the last piece that's in the models here is an indicator for each student's instructor, or each instructor teaching a transfer level math course. And so what I'll show next is we're looking at how all of these factors contribute to what we can explain in the outcome of whether or not a student is passing that course. And what we find is that students' instructors are overwhelmingly the most important factor or most important predictor in determining student success, passing with a C or higher in transfer level math courses. So what this figure is showing, beyond just that the instructor bar is taller than the other bars, is we're looking at how much variation in our model can be explained by that set of covariates after everything else has been accounted for. So after we've already accounted for student demographics, for high school GPA, whether the student's taking a remedial course previously, where they went to high school, and the course attributes, the instructor still accounts for 34% of the variation in that outcome. Prior academic preparation, which we've known to be really important from past work, continues to be really important, represents about 14% of the explained variance, followed by the high school that a student attended, student demographics, and course attributes. And so the last piece I'll say on this is we estimated this a lot of different ways, and this finding really holds up across different samples, different time periods, and different outcomes. That every way we look at it, instructors are the most important determinant of student success in transferable math courses. So we look at this. The results I showed you are from our pooled sample, which includes winter 2020 through spring 2022. We also look at this with the latest term of data, spring 2022. A primary advantage of that is most courses have come back to in-person at that point, and so we're able to sort of see if these patterns hold when courses are primarily in a in-person setting, versus a lot of the time in our full sample is affected by distance or by COVID, and as a result, courses are offered by distance. These patterns hold when we look at this by student racial ethnic groups. This also holds with some sort of adjustments to the sample. It's about 20% of students in the sample that are missing high school GPA. And whether we impute for missing high school GPAs based on other non-missing data, or we remove students from the sample who are missing GPA, we see the same story. The pattern is exactly the same. And we find the same story across different outcomes. So whether or not students passed with a B or higher, the grade that a student earned in the course, and whether or not the student withdrew from the course. So we feel really very confident in that finding. And now I'm going to pass to Mina to talk more about instructional practices, to sort of drill into a little bit of what we're seeing in that overall instructor effect.
Thank you, Sam. And I saw a couple of questions about, I know you talked about some of the other outcomes, whether or not students are passing with a B or higher GPA and so on. There was a question about kind of even longer term outcomes, right? What happens after? And in our study, we're not able to follow students for that long. However, other research has shown that, success in passing a transfer level math course carries on later on, and we can put some link to that research as well. So the second part of the study is, what is the role of instructional practices in supporting student success in Gateway Math? And so we looked at, and if you would advance, please, Sam. We looked at the literature to begin with to guide us towards what instructional practices should we begin looking at. And we looked at qualitative research as well as empirical research, and we identified the domains or the areas of practices that we've listed below. Then we had input from our advisory that were both research experts and faculty. And I want to say we also added practices that we didn't necessarily have strong empirical evidence, or we didn't have research evidence for it, but faculty really wanted us to test. So we included that in the list of our practices as well. The list of the practices fell into these 4 domains or areas: assessment and grading, classroom culture and messaging of support to students, pedagogy, and instructors' commitment to reducing racial equity gaps and the actions that they take to do so. We use these areas and the domains as subdomains, the areas and kind of sub areas, to then help us develop a survey to give to faculty. So we would ask about specific examples of these things and how they manifest. And we also developed a syllabi rubric that would review faculty syllabi and see how these practices or the subdomains really showed up in the syllabi. And if you would advance, please, we can talk about that. So for spring 2022, in addition to the outcomes that Sam mentioned, we had student outcomes, we had course characteristics, we had student characteristics, and we had faculty data, and we're able to match all that. We're able to match all that with faculty responses on the survey and the syllabi rubric. And what we find is that, so first I want to thank every faculty that was in our study and responded to the survey, because that helped us learn from their practices and from the survey and from the syllabi. We had a 75% survey response rate. So once we analyze the link between instructional practices and student outcomes, controlling for all the student characteristics that Sam mentioned before, as well as course characteristics, this is what we found. So this is our big finding in terms of instructional practices. If you could go, thank you. So I just want to pause for a moment. So these are specific subdomains or sub-areas that we found were particularly helpful, and we have indicated for which groups of students they were particularly helpful. As you will see here, every single one of these practices was helpful for Black students, or groups of practices, you could say, were helpful for Black students. Several were helpful for Latino students and one for Asian students. So these results are really driven by Black and mainly Black students and some by Latino students. So what were those practices? Two that particularly, one that particularly had large coefficients, and we can talk about the effects of these things, effect sizes, was fostering belonging. So I want to talk a little bit about what that was. Fostering belonging and encouraging students to seek help and communicate in support. So these practices were particularly beneficial for Black students. And how we define fostering belonging is it has several aspects. One is opportunities for students. An instructor provides intentional opportunities for students to collaborate, to get to know each other. An instructor may, you'll hear examples of this from our colleagues, an instructor may address concerns about belonging and ensure students that, if they work hard and if they seek support, they can in fact succeed in the class, no matter how they've done in high school or what their perceptions of math have been in the past, that in this class, with certain guidance, with certain level of effort, and with support seeking, they can succeed. What we mean by encouraging students to seek support is that, one is communicating that the instructor is there to help students, right? We have heard from prior research that students are not always sure when to ask for help. They are not sure how to ask for help. They're not sure, we've heard anecdotes of students not being sure whether office hours are the time when they should see faculty or whether it's the time that they shouldn't bother faculty, right? The faculty are in their office and that's the time when they shouldn't contact them, right? So it's how to get help, having the confidence to get help, and knowing when to get help. There are instructors that are very specific about, these are the times when you come and see me. If you're having trouble with an assignment, that's the time when you come and see me, and I'm happy to help you when you do, right? So those are the examples of what we mean by encouraging students to seek support. What we mean by offering accommodations equitably is, the first aspect of that is offering accommodations, acknowledging that some of our students work full-time, care for children or elderly, like they have many responsibilities, and that life happens, and there are multiple opportunities for students to succeed if something happens to them. The other issue is the equity part of that. A lot of times, we're learning that students who have social capital, maybe students whose parents went to college, they might know that it's okay to approach a faculty member and ask for an extension, for example. Students who are first generation college student may not know that that's an option, right? So when there's an assignment that students are struggling with, some faculty members say, I've given some students an extension. I want you to know that if you're struggling with this assignment, this is offered to everyone. That's the equity aspect. That's an example of the equity aspect of that. The two last ones are taking responsibility for addressing racial equity. So some examples of that we'll hear later from our faculty members, but some examples of that are that we saw in the syllabi, for example, are, you know, in group work, we don't want to see, first of all, we want to see respect for diverse backgrounds. And secondly, in group work, it's not that the same student gets to lead and do all the challenging work, and some students just, you know, just do work that is not as challenging, right? That we take turns, for example. In assignment, there's some guidelines for how a classroom, how students are going to treat each other in the classroom. There are faculty that, you know, we had a survey questions that said, I will interfere and do something if there are racist comments made in the class. These are all examples of actions as well as taking responsibility to reduce racial equity. And finally, we talked about assessment and grading being part of one of our domains. Two of the things that particularly showed up in that domain, one was transparent assessment and grading, which there is a lot of actually empirical evidence for. That is being very clear what the grading criteria is, being very clear about what is an example of a well-done assignment, right? That's transparency. If you were to get an A, what would it look like? So again, students who don't have social capital can get a sense of what they should be producing. It could also include things like practice exams and so on. The other part of this is growth oriented. So what happens if students don't do well in the beginning? Are there multiple opportunities for them to improve? You know, are we allowing for growth, for redos, and so on? I want to pause here and first see if there are any questions that have gathered at this point, and if so, please put that in Q&A. And if there are no questions, we'd like to hear examples of these practices from the faculty panel who have joined us. Michelle, are there any questions, or are we ready to move to the panel?
I believe they've been all addressed, so I think we can move to the panel.
Great, thank you. So we can go off slides now. Should we, as we get spotlighted, as our panel gets spotlighted, maybe we can start doing introductions. Hi, Bree. Hi, Linda. Hi, Anna Linda. Hi, Tammy. So maybe we should just, we should go, Linda, you're next on my screen. Would you introduce yourself, and then we can go to Anna Linda, Bree, and Tammy.
Hi, I'm Linda Hintzman. I've been teaching mathematics at Pasadena City College since 1999.
Anna Linda.
Hi, I'm Anna Linda Arroyo. I go by Anna. I've been teaching at Cuyamaca College. I started part-time back in 2010, and right now I'm a full-time faculty member there.
Hi everyone, I'm Bree Hayes. I serve as the Interim Vice President of Student Services and also the Senior Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, Success, and Equity at Cuyamaca College, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you.
Hi everybody, I am Tammy Marshall, and as of July 1st, I am the Interim Dean of Math Science Engineering. Before that, I was the chair of the math department at Cuyamaca College.
Thank you all. Thank you all, and thank you all for being willing to be here, as well as just being so generous with sharing everything that you've done with us to prepare for this. I want to start by asking about how two specific practices that we've highlighted here look like in the classroom. So two that are related and we find that are particularly effective for Black students are encouraging students to seek help and communicating support to them, and also fostering belonging. Let me start with you, Linda. Can you provide some of the examples of what it might look like in the classrooms and some of the work that your college has done and you've done?
Sure. One of the things that we do at the beginning of every semester is faculty are allowed to sign up to bring their entire class to our Math Success Center, where students can get their math tutoring, have study sessions. And the idea is that we're trying to make it very easy for students to go there. We want to make sure that they know where to go. They want to make sure that they know what they're going to expect, and so that it's not a scary unknown trip for their first attempt to get tutoring help, so that we make it real easy by taking them all there so that everybody is familiar with the situation. Everybody knows how to log into the center, log out of the center, what to expect. So that's one thing that we've started recently that really seems to make a difference. We also have faculty members who hold their office hours in our Math Success Center, so that students who are, coming for office hours are realizing that they can come there at any time to get help from any of the other tutors or the other faculty that are there. And what Mina mentioned earlier is that one of the other things that we do now is that we call our office hours visitation hours, because most of our students, unfortunately, are familiar with visitation hours. And they understand what that means. That's when you're supposed to come visit me. Whereas they tend to think that office hours is when I'm working in my office and I don't want to be disturbed. And so being really clear and using language that they can understand is really, I think, a step in the right direction. And it's a small and easy step to take.
And Linda, I just wanted to follow up, one of the things that is very well documented in research, and we can put the links to the research in chat, in prior research, not our study, is that students who need the most help are the least likely to access support. And, the work by Rebecca Cox, for example, the college fear factor, shows that part of this is because students are intimidated. I have to go to a tutoring center. Does that mean that, do I need to be very clear about what help I need? What do I need to say? And also, does it just show that I'm not college material? Am I admitting to everyone by doing that? So you're, by everyone going to the center, you're desegmentizing it, you're making it accessible. And did you want to talk about, I know you had done some focus groups that had led your college in this direction. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, we had some student focus groups. And another thing that we do off and on, hasn't totally embedded our psyche yet, but we also have shared office hours, so that all the teachers who are teaching the same course open their office hours to any student taking that course, not just their own. So my students can go to Richard's office hours or Jay's office hours, and their students can come to my office hours. And one thing that does is students are terrified of admitting they don't understand things to their own instructor. They don't view us as someone there to help them learn. They view us as the person judging their ability. And so they don't want to come to us and admit that they can't understand what we're saying in class. And so students are much more open and comfortable going to see another professor to get the help they need, rather than necessarily seeing their own professor. So through the focus groups, we learned that students have these very strange misconceptions from our viewpoint as to what office hours are for and who should be going, and that it's not a stigma that you're stupid. It's, if you go to office hours, you're doing what students do, right? Students go to office hours all the time, but especially our first gen students don't recognize that. They see it as more like getting detention after school in high school. It looks like a penalty to them, not what good college students do.
Thank you, Linda. I wonder, Anna Linda, if you want to add to that, and then I'll ask Tammy. I know you have also changed the name of office hours, so maybe first you respond to that, and then I want to ask you about fostering belonging.
Yeah, there's so many things to respond to, Linda. I love the fact that we're, I don't know how many miles apart, but still kind of messing with those same things, where you talked about having in the center. I host my student hours in our STEM center, where it really is just a large floor where tutoring happens. Students have access to computers, and Cuyamaca Cares allows us to have, or not allows us, but helps provide snacks and soft drinks for our students. So I literally take that bag and I wander around the center, just introducing myself to other math students, and then helping my math students. So when you talk about literally kind of breaking down those barriers where, oh, a student might not feel so comfortable admitting that they need help from their instructor, they're more than willing to ask someone else. And so, yeah, I've had that even this semester where I'm helping other students taking a calculus course with another instructor, because they're like, oh, I met you and you're here. And then, I feel comfortable talking about these things with you. And I love your visitation hours. I have student hours, and maybe that's still confusing, but visitation hours, just like you mentioned, is just so clarifying. So again, thank you.
And there was a comment in the Q&A that I do want to address, that yes, there is some concern that visitation hours could have a negative connotation, because that's what you have in hospitals and that's what you have in those sorts of situations. And so, we do have to be cognizant of, the life experiences that our students are coming from, but we couldn't come up with something better. But I'm kind of liking maybe student hours or some combination of the two. I don't know.
Yeah.
Annalinda, I'd like to ask you to talk about fostering belonging a little more, as we talked about, how to provide opportunities for students to connect with each other, for example. I know you have a lot of examples of that. With these debates about what terms to use, I think I just want to highlight it might look different in practice and you try different things, see how they work, but I think they all respond to the same principle of how would we talk about this to be encouraging to students and to be less difficult to navigate, right? We talked about Rebecca Cox's work, also Melinda Karp's work on how can we make college easier to navigate for students that are first generation, right? So these are just ideas. And again, since you do focus groups with students might have ideas about what should it be called. But I just wanted to say, I really, really appreciate these manifestations of what it could look like from students' perspective. Annalinda, do you want to explain how you foster belonging among students that may come to college, may come to a classroom wondering if their college material, maybe will they ever be good at math? Are they the only one that, are they the only one somehow? They are different from others. What are some strategies?
So, I mean, it starts even before you meet them, right? So we're talking about the syllabi, the first point of contact for students, that they look and read and kind of judge what type of relationship they might have with us. So I think about the syllabi. How am I communicating that we are teachers and learners, that I'm learning just as much as they are, that again, just that open kind of communication. And every time it's not me dictating what needs to get done, but that we are doing this together in our course. And so even the vocabulary they use is a lot more inclusive and a lot more kind of community, like the idea of a community and a village, that we're really working together throughout this process. So I start there and making sure that in my syllabi, it's not just one blurb here or two, or it's something that's literally wherever I can stick it, I'm trying to make that happen. Because you never know where students are going to land in your syllabi. Like, what are they looking for when they jump in there? And then I think about our first day. So the first day experience, I tell the students, we're going to do some speed dating. And then they all kind of look and laugh a little awkwardly. And I have them like, we're already getting up and we're mixing things up. I want the students to know that that they're not just sitting at their chairs. It's not a stationary process of learning, that it's going to be active and engaging. So I group them and literally have the students around the room, like, okay, this many students to the back, this many students facing them. And if there's an odd number, then I'm just literally giving these directions while I'm in that process. So I'm also going to be engaging in this if there's an odd number of students, or if a student comes in late, I'll be your date before we get this. And when you're like, what am I asking these students to do? Well, the first thing, just the icebreakers. What's your major? What classes are you taking? So they could start chit-chatting about that, and then possibly see, are they taking similar classes that semester? And they say, okay, I want the people who are facing the wall to rotate 5 to the left. And it seems arbitrary that I'm doing this, but it's actually intentional. The students, I'm giving them direction on how to change and interact. They're like, oh, I have to listen to, how do I need to move? They're already helping each other in navigating and making sure they're talking to the right person, that they went to the right direction, so they're already doing this on the day one, and they don't really realize the things that, I'm having them do at this moment. And then I ask them something else that's also very how can I say, like putting your barriers down, simple things, foods and hobbies. And then they'll kind of go off on that for a little bit. And then I might take it to a little bit deeper. I'm asking them, what makes you feel respected in a classroom? What's the best or worst experience that you had in the classroom? And so they get to share stories and kind of connect with each other on a little bit of a deeper level. And then I'll get to engage in some of those conversations. And then we kind of, okay, let's go back to a class setting, but I want you to call out and tell me some of the things that you were hearing from other students. So it's not like I'm forcing them to say their own experience, but engage in like, oh, their story, or oh, their story reminded me of this time. And when they're doing this, this allows me to really gauge the culture of my classroom. So I can listen to, what was your past experiences? What was really good and helpful to you? Okay, I'll try to make sure that happens in the class. Oh, what was a bad experience? Well, let's talk about the expectations of our classroom and how we can handle that if that comes up. So I kind of use that to help norm kind of expectations, but then also address like their concerns and try to plan around. One of my students this semester was like, honestly, I'm kind of an introvert and this is intense. And I was like, don't worry, give me 5 more minutes and then we'll do this. And then now I know that that person is my little introvert. So I'm going to make sure that when we're in groups, I'm going to check in with you once a day, at least, just to be like, so how are you doing? Are there any questions? So just make sure they're being taken care of. So this is something I can do on the first day. And then I might do an activity later on in the semester that allows them to, again, do some more processing. But again, I know I talked a lot.
Thank you. I want to highlight a few things that you said and kind of the research evidence behind that. That I think the examples you're saying of, this is our course and how you address students are basically anticipating and addressing power dynamics, right? That their instructor is not an intimidating person that, it's, and you're checking in with students individually, again, that levels the playing field and power. And, the guidelines for working with each other and addressing each other, which has an equity aspect. I love how the examples just bring to life how students get to practice these group guidelines within this setting. I want to bring Tammy in. Tammy, did you want to add anything to our principles of fostering belonging and encouraging students to seek support? And maybe I'll add taking responsibility for addressing racial equity gaps, or the third one.
Yeah, sure. I love listening to other people. So a couple of the things that I have done in the classroom that has really worked, and some of the things that I think people forget about is, and I know most people are now understand this idea of, if a student doesn't come to class, is reaching out, right? Messaging them in some way, whether it's a message through Canvas, or whatever, learning management system that you use, or however that may be. But sometimes we don't hear back from students. And as department chair, I would sometimes get a faculty member in my office who says something to me, I don't know what's going on with the students. They haven't responded. And I just look at, have you tried calling them? We sometimes forget. And so I will intentionally call students and, just say, hey, I noticed you haven't, sometimes they don't answer, but I'll leave a message, and, but a lot of times they will answer too. And, just asking, I've reached out a couple times and I haven't heard from you. I'm really worried about you, but always making the messaging be about that, my worry for them, rather than the fact that they haven't been in class. Yeah, they haven't been in class, but I'm worried about them. Is there something going on in their life? Is there something that they need help with? Whatever the situation may be. And students are more likely to open up when you approach them in that way, right? That there's a concern, not necessarily, I can't believe you haven't been in class. It's not, that we don't approach things that way. So that's really important. And we sometimes forget that. I do something similar to what Anna said on the first day. I won't get into it, but one of the big things that I have found that really helps with this sense of belonging is asking students publicly what their pronouns are, so that other students know what their pronouns are, right? Because this is important that we acknowledge and call our students in the way in which they want to be called. And I think that we often forget that. And so I'll make sure that that is something that we do on the first day. It also helps students in the sense of belonging because they will understand and recognize that they may not be the only non-binary person in this classroom, right? And so it helps them with those, you know, oh, I'm not alone, I'm in this together, you know, and just sharing that kind of thing with the students. So I think that's really important. And then, you know, when we talk about just sense of belonging and all these other things, and Anna could talk more about this than I can, but, you know, in our statistics projects that we do, the students pick their own set of data that they work with, and they pick what they want to study. So they're basically picking the data that they want to study throughout the semester. And in quantitative reasoning, I did something similar so that everything we did was project based, but I always have the students, the projects, the way they're built are so that they're about the student, right? So that they're not, so they're about what they want to study, what their career is, where do they see themselves? Again, something similar, we, you know, in quantitative reasoning, we also have a small statistics area, and I found an online website where students can literally get free data sets, and that are real data sets. And so we can just simply look at like even median and, you know, though, you know, of this kind of thing, but they can decide what is it that they want to look at, so that, you know, this builds in this this sense of belonging for themselves, but also addressing that I want them to look at what's important to them, which also brings in that accountability for racial and gender equity, which I think is really, really important. So that's something that's really important to me. Just a couple of other things. Several faculty in our college, not just in our math department, but in math, science, and engineering overall, have participated in several of the @ONE courses. Humanizing online STEM has been a huge one for many of our faculty, which has really gone a long way, as well as equitable grading strategies. I took that one and that changed my world. So that now everything I do is contract grading in my classes. I don't actually give grades, and it has freed me as a teacher. I never realized how much it was going to free me, but it actually did. I enjoy grading now because I'm not taking off random points and deciding how those random points are taken off. And so it's really freed me, and it's helped the students to understand that what's important to me is that they're learning the material, not, you know, not these random things that they have to learn. I don't know if you wanted me to get into addressing racial equity and some of the things we had talked about with our department, Mina, that we've done as a department.
How you institutionalize this beyond classroom. Let me actually, since you started on grading, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, not a problem.
Let's move to grading. You know, we talked about transparent grading, things that are, you know, there is random assignment experiments that when students are given examples of what grading, of what a good assignment looks like ahead of time, and when they are given when they're given a clear grading criteria, and that's randomly, you know, faculty randomly create these sheets, randomly assigned to faculty, that they're positive outcomes. So we have gold standard on that aspect. And then several of you talked with another aspect of grading that we found to be helpful, which was grading that allows for improvement over time, right? So I wanted to see if there are any other comments on grading. And Bree, if you wanted to make any comments about work that Cuyamaca has done, and Linda, if you want to jump in as well. You know, we hear that, you know, grading is something that there's a lot of variation in, and you know, there are folks who are, but you know, I want to hear your thoughts on that. Sometimes people say standardization is not necessarily a good thing if it means we all agree on the wrong thing. So how do we all agree on the right thing, right? I just want to hear some of the work that you all have done, and I'll see if Bree, you want to start, or Linda, or Tammy.
Sure. That's actually something that's kind of new and working its way around our campus. So we do have one of our faculty members in the English department who's built a community of practice around equitable grading. And I see Anna and Tammy nodding because they know Dr. Bree Brown at Cuyamaca actually did her whole dissertation on contract grading, labor-based grading practices. And so she's been gradually working with folks on our campus to really, to bring attention to this and really look at this as to rethink our practices and make it really demystify it. It's still relatively new in terms of making its rounds on campus. So in terms of doing an evaluation of that, very much at the practitioner level, looking at, kind of before they implemented contract grading and now that they are doing contract grading, what the, experience for the student is and how they're seeing differences in student success. And so, right now we do need to take on something broader right now, probably very much working with Dr. Bree Brown, but I would say that, anecdotally and speaking with our faculty, I'm looking at Tammy and Nana, it's something that we're hearing a lot of very positive things in a qualitative sense in terms of the impact it's had on both their practice and on their students' experiences.
Tammy, will you quickly respond to their questions about our resources on contract grading? And if you can say a little more, I don't know if everyone knows what you mean by that, and also if there are.
So contract grading. Yeah, contract grading essentially is a situation where I establish a contract with the students. As in my syllabi, in my syllabus, it says how a student earns each of the grades. So every assignment that the student does, they receive one of essentially 3 grades. They either received a grade of accomplished, meaning that they have done the assignment and they have showed that they met the learning outcomes with the assignment. Not yet, please revise, which means that there's some work that they need to do. And all of this always comes with lots of me saying things, either writing comments, speaking aloud comments, doing different things within Canvas, within their assignments, so that they understand, where they need to maybe do some work. And then missing, which is, that they didn't turn it in yet. And so for my students, it basically, the contract says, in order to earn an A in this class, you have to have earned a grade of accomplished on these assignments, this many of these assignments. So this many projects, this many, regular homework assignments, or this many of the, discussions, or whatever it is that you do in your class, they have to have earned accomplished on these, on this many. And then for a B, it's different. And then for a C, it's different. And then I just do A, B, and C, and then that's it. I don't tell them what they, and nobody really wants to know, what do I have to do to get a D, right? They're not really worried about that. They want to know, what do they have to do to get that A, that B, or that C. And so that's essentially what contract grading is. There's a lot more to it. And Bree has been my inspiration, Dr. Bree Brown here at Cuyamaca. But so that's essentially what it is. And then, but there's other ways of grading that's not that. There's lots of different things. There's minimum grading. There's, using portfolios. There's, I forget what it's called, work-based grading or something. I forget what it's called, but there's all of these different types of things that you can use. And again, the @ONE is really where I learned all about it. And so if you haven't taken the equitable grading strategies through @ONE, I highly recommend it. It is extremely powerful. And then I joined the community of practice through @ONE. That was after you do that, there was a community of practice around equitable grading strategies, and that I joined. And I learned a lot then from other faculty. And for me, it's important that I hear from faculty, not necessarily just in math, because math faculty tend to think the same, and I want to hear other ideas that aren't just in the math department, because I'm going to hear things that are different than what I might normally think.
Thank you, Tammy. Anna Linda and Linda, let's see, Anna Linda, do you want to go next on grading? And Linda, if you wanted to add anything to that, and then we're going to go to equitable practice that address racial equity specifically. So Anna Linda, maybe you want to So nice.
Yeah, especially when it comes to grading, the biggest thing is if I'm not, I have to practice what I preach. So if I tell students that it's okay to make mistakes, then I have to make sure that I make assignments that allow them to make a mistake and then learn from it and address it and, okay, fix it. So a lot of the times, a lot of the formative assessments and even the summative assessments. So imagine a formative assessment, you learn a little bit, you do a little bit, right? So the student might do a small homework assignment, a small problem set, maybe an embedded Canvas quiz of some sort, or anything, right? And they have multiple tries. And when they do each of those attempts, they're getting immediate feedback, whether it be a walkthrough video or some sort of kind of guided, embedded, feedback that we can put into Canvas. So imagine these formative assessments where they have multiple attempts, they are going ahead and getting feedback, so they're constantly growing from it, still trying for it. And then when they get stuck on it, right at that point of when they're working on that assignment, they have a link that they can go to a discussion board and post that question and get some feedback from the learning community, right? So from their classmates, from me, I can see what they have questions about. So then I can either address it as holistically as a class, if it's something that's a kind of a common sticking point, or I can just reach out to that student and just have that conversation there, but publicly, where the students all kind of see it. And then I'll even get comments like, oh, that was so helpful, just going through our own conversation. Because sometimes students just don't know what to ask yet, but to see that kind of conversation happen, they're like, oh, I see, I think I know what I want to ask now, or, oh, this made a good point, so now I want to know this. So just giving those opportunities. And then thinking about the summative assessment, we think about oftentimes in STEM, we make it something that's a kind of a high risk, right? Or a high stress, a moment of stress for students, anxiety, because it's big, it's summative. We're doing covering a lot of concepts. So any way that we can do, just give the student opportunity to come back to it. So imagine in a homework assignment, they might have access to the solution right away to the solutions. And they get, what do they call it? Kind of like a model of good work. I think Linda mentioned that, kind of like, oh, you want to see something that this is high quality. This is what we're kind of aiming for, how we should structure our answers. And then in a summative assessment, I might not put a solutions key to that, but I kind of open it up and give the students an opportunity to give feedback to each other. They'll submit their first draft, they can compare each other's answers, what they did, and then give that feedback like, oh, I also guide this process, like what kind of feedback, what's high quality feedback? Well, what learning objective are they working on? Where do you see that mistake happening? Maybe we can guide, did they miss part of the question? Is there something that they can try? Or, hey, is there an example that they can go back to in Canvas that would be really helpful to that student that they found helpful? So really kind of giving the students, like empowering the students to be an active part in this learning process, whether it be in a smaller formative assessment where they do already have immediate feedback, or in that summative assessment where they're actively engaged in a conversation, and then they get to go ahead and submit a final draft that I'll go ahead and then, okay, now I'll engage with you on this final draft after you've processed the information just more in depth. So yeah.
Thank you. Linda, did you want to, maybe I'll just say something quick, because there was a question about AI and I can't see the question anymore, but maybe it was already responded to, maybe one of the panelists responded to already, but it's about the role of AI. And I think what the examples that I already heard, like with Tammy saying, people get real data and they work on their own, or sorry, maybe Anna-Linda, you were saying that, but they work on their real world projects. And in some ways, that is what they need to do later on in life. I mean, that's they and whether you have AI or not, if they can do a good job on figuring out answers to real statistical problems, then that is great. And the examples you're providing, Anna-Linda, you're talking about that higher level of learning at the same time as when you're fostering belonging. At the same time, it's not stressful, right? So it's just wanted to say back those aspects of those positive evidence-based aspects of the things that you're describing. Linda, did you want to say anything about grading before we go to addressing racial equity gaps?
I can say a couple of things. I mentioned it in the Q&A, but in case people missed it, we had a group, and we have a reading group, and one of the books we read couple years ago was Grading for Equity. And that was a really great resource for us to figure out how to recognize first how unequitable our traditional grading practices were for many of us, and then to get examples of how to do it. And it can be a little tricky if you're using like the Canvas gradebook, something like that, that's very structured, but you still can do it in lots of things. It doesn't need to be huge changes. I mean, one of the small things that we do is we recognize that at the beginning of the semester, not only are students trying to learn the material, but they're also trying to learn how we assess. How do we test? What sort of questions do we write? And so making those earlier quizzes and tests worth a smaller percentage of their overall grade, because they're learning the material and learning how they're going to be assessed. And so to lower those stakes, if you bomb the first test, I don't want it to mean that there's no way you can get an A in my class ever. So little things like that. It doesn't take huge shifts. You can start small. You don't try and perfect it the first time. Please, that never works. And another thing that a lot of math faculty are doing at PCC now is they're really focusing on standards-based grading. So they are giving students multiple attempts, very clearly stating what the standards are and how many you have to pass, how many you have to be, capable of to get an A, and how many you have to be capable of to get a B or a C. So it's very clear to students where they stand. It is time consuming in the need to have multiple assessments and to give multiple assessments. And so working in teams, it's much easier for the faculty to come up with multiple assessments instead of each one trying to do it for themselves. We have just reopened our makeup testing center on campus. And so that's a way that it takes some of the pressure off of the faculty, because they can set up the assessment somewhere else. They don't have to monitor it themselves. There's lots of ways to do these types of changes and lots of ways to make it easier on yourself, basically through teamwork.
Thank you. And especially with, your example of the grades at the end are worth more, or, in the beginning, students are just figuring out. That also has an equity aspect, right? Because students who are first generation college students may not know what to expect, may know a lot less about what to expect in the beginning, and you're allowing them, you're giving them basically time to have a learning curve. So appreciate that. With that, let's speak about what does it look like, and maybe Anna, I will begin with you, and I want to see who else would like to add to this. Can you talk about some of the specific work that you're doing? Tammy already mentioned because the work is project-based, students can do it on something that really relates to them. And Anna, you already mentioned that, we want students to, we have examples of what is relevant to students' cultures and to them as well. But can you talk about what it looks like to specifically address racial equity in teaching math?
Oh, okay, big one. When I think about, again, when we're trying to be responsible for addressing that racial equity, it's an ongoing, and we have to remember that it's ever evolving, right? So when we start, it really starts with understanding why that inequity is there in the first place. So as a faculty member, and honestly, as a faculty member, knowing the administration, having that support where they can tell you where you can go to get training, where we can learn and really get this information that you can really wrap your mind around is essential. And so I know that Tammy, it first started when I was a part-timer with OnCourse, but then it's been so much. So OnCourse helped me with some effective domain assignments. But then when I think about the equity-minded teaching and learning institute that Cuyamaca College has, it's a year-long course. You have a cohort of faculty that are literally studying together, and it starts with just looking at your own disaggregated data, and then kind of responding to what could be causing that. What is the unconscious biases? And what's funny is that you did mention earlier when talking about the research that K through 12, we have to think about what's happening with underfunded schools, with the criminalization of young students of color, suspensions, expulsions, like what's their experience coming into our campus, and the trauma that causes, and the reactions, and how they engage with us as faculty members here at least at the community college level. So I didn't really recognize, or I knew it because I experienced it, but seeing the data, being exposed to different to articles, what I can read was really formative for me. And so after engaging in those conversations, being able to return back and then run one of I think it was the stereotype, threat, and microaggression in the classroom session, there I was exposed to the data where I could really process, like, oh, when it's not something that just the person who is being microaggressed gets affected, but literally everybody who witnessed it. And that really changes like how you engage with learning a material. And so sometimes sneaking that into the classroom, like, hey, here's this data, here's this percentage, or making sure that it happens organically in the classroom so we can have conversations about it. Small things like taking a little bit of time in class to acknowledge that, hey, events that might affect various populations. Again, like what's active in social media? Is there something like a violent event that's taking place? Is there a catastrophe that's hurting a specific population of our campus? We have such a diverse group. And again, I think of our immigrant students, our vets, everybody. There's so much to kind of address, and there's just little things that we can do, whether it's just taking a few minutes in class just to kind of have a class discussion where people can share their opinions and stuff, or if I can give them resources to where they can go. So for example, the culture and community events that we host, or the social justice conferences that we've hosted, or the Black consciousness conferences that I put myself in a position to be a part of those conversations and then be able to invite my students to. I took one of my stat classes during the pandemic. We were via Zoom, and I took them to, it was a panel, because it was like, I'm trying to remember, sorry. We were celebrating a panel of, women of color, right? Women of color. So we're talking about sciencey things like the cells. I can't think of it because I'm just so excited about it. But I was able to take my class to this event because we were meeting via Zoom anyway. So we went to this thing. We got to hear about these amazing women, from journalists that have changed things in civil rights to just so many things. And then being able to come back to class, via Zoom. And then we either have a conversation about it. And because they gave us some data stuff, then it's like, oh, well, let's look into some things. And maybe we might have an extra conversation later about it. It exposes them to, again, I always say, like, get to know our community. We have such a diverse community at Cuyamaca College. So again, it really isn't a thing where it's like, oh, we can go ahead and find out about the other cultures and the people and the other things in the classroom, things that are affecting other populations, that we can have either conversations in class, or I can offer extra credit and create a small Canvas quiz where students can reflect on what they saw or what they heard. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, and trying to be there for, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Sorry,
Yeah.
just a lot of talking. And then just making sure that I'm holding myself responsible to making sure that my students are seen, are heard, and have places to go to have these other conversations, even if it's just not in our classroom.
Thank you. I want to just highlight something you started off saying, that you mentioned that, we acknowledge race, we acknowledge culture, we acknowledge ethnic backgrounds so that students can learn math. And I want to mention a piece of research that was done about multicultural versus colorblind messaging. And that was another random experiment assignment when some faculty read statements that were, that said, in this classroom, we are stronger because we're a diverse group of students and different backgrounds add something to our learning, to being part of the class. And others read messages, and the control group didn't have any messages. And then there was another group of faculty that were assigned to read, everyone's the same. I treat everyone equally, right? The colorblind and the students of color in those classrooms, after the messages were read the first day of class, they performed better on quizzes, randomly assigned studies, right? So we're talking about these things with having direct links to math learning, like the sense of belonging, that I belong here, there's a reason I'm here, even though I look different from most of the class, it doesn't mean that I don't belong, right? That these things then prepare students to be able to learn that there's a place for me here. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you. Any other comments? And I haven't checked questions for a while, but any other comments about ways? And I know, Linda, there is deep work that you all are doing with data for for a long time at Pasadena. Did you want to mention that also?
Well, before, I want to sort of play off of what you were just saying. One of the things that we worked on last year was collecting a bunch of little short biographies of people of color in STEM fields, because I mean, we need to get more students of color to take that STEM route. And I think one of the reasons they don't is they don't see themselves, you know, we see a lot of white male scientists everywhere, and we don't see a lot of women, we don't see a lot of people of color. So we've amassed a collection of little biographies that we have available to all faculty in our Canvas shell, and they can use those as little discussion prompts in their courses, whether it's a face-to-face class or hybrid or fully online. We still use Canvas a lot. And so just to help our students see students like themselves, scientists like themselves in these things. So I think it's really important to help them, you know, they can't be it if they can't see it as an option. And so we really need to be, and, you know, for me, it's especially important, I think, because, you know, I'm a white middle-class woman. So it's not, you know, it's not like I'm not their role model. I need them to see people like themselves. So that's what I was wanting to say.
Thank you. I want to just open up to our panel for a minute. If there are any questions that you rather than typing, you would like to answer. If there is anything about practices that you would like to share about the practice of what we just talked about, because then I'd like to move to how can we, you know, Michelle started by saying there is evidence that, you know, institutionalizing these practices requires high quality professional learning, whether it's peer mentorship, whether it's communities of practice, whether it's other forums. So I want to get to that, but first I want to take a minute to see if there's anything else to add on. Yeah, let me open it up. Okay. So let's move to that question of, you know, if you're a chair, if you are a faculty member that would like to, you know, we learn better in groups. I think one of you mentioned that. I think Tammy mentioned, I learn from other faculty. You know, we offer mentorship, receive mentorship. I want to ask you, maybe start with Tammy and Bree. Maybe Tammy, you can start, and Bree, you can add to it. What does it look like to go beyond specific, amazing individual faculty to institutionalizing effective practices to learn from each other? How can it look like? What are some different forms?
I think it starts with a determination in the department to make changes, right? But it also starts with a partner in somebody like Bree, with your research office, because one of the things that we have done, not just in our math department, I want to say it's really been done in many of the departments across Cuyamaca College, but we have done it in math as well, is, you know, we have done studies looking at, so for instance, I think it was about 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, we did a study of everybody got their individualized data, right, disaggregated, kind of like what Anna was talking about, but we did it, everybody in the math department, not part of EMTLI. And it was disaggregated over the last 3 years, and it was disaggregated by many different ways, by, you know, by gender, by ethnicity and race, by the class you teach overall, and compared to the department as a whole, which I thought was really important. So that's one thing. And then what we did is we did some trainings and some things across, you know, through the next 3 years many of us would go to things, we'd attend a webinar, we'd attend a workshop, and then it's like, you know, we'd bring things back and share with everyone, right? And then 3 years later, we did the same study, right? So we're then doing it again. Okay, let's see if any of the things that we've done in the last 3 years has made, you know, has made some difference. And to many of the faculty, it did. And so they saw, you know, changes in, you know, positive changes in how their disaggregated data looked. But one of the other things that we also did was, you know, it was kind of a precursor almost to this study, was that we went with the English department. We kind of came together and we were like, we both want to do this study. It was a huge study of looking at the grade differences, the variability of grades in a department, right? And it was anonymized, everything, you know, so nobody knew who anybody was. And we looked at this, you know, in the math department, and we looked at it in the English department, and then there was a hole between the two departments, English and math. And, you know, one of the things that's fascinating is to see in the math department, why is there a variability in, you know, success rates in your class of, you know, 20% to 100%? How does anybody have 100% success rate? I'd love it. I've never been able to accomplish it. But, you know, so, and then have conversations about, why do we think this is? What is causing this? What are we doing? What are some of the unconscious biases that are happening in our own classroom that has this? Because we don't know where we are on that scale, right? Like, you know, I mean, I could make a guess about where I was. I could certainly go back and look at my data, right? But looking at it as a whole really does help us in seeing that, in seeing how different it really is, so that we can all come to this conversation about how we can make those changes in our own classroom. And so those are just some of the small things. So you have to have this, you have to be willing to have hard conversations, right? Amongst each other. And a lot of people aren't willing to have those hard conversations. But, you know, and a lot of people in the math department maybe weren't ready to have those conversations. But as department chair and doing the planning for the professional development week, I said, this is what we're going to do. You know, if they're coming, they're going to do it. You're going to participate. And so that was one of the things that made it, you know, that kind of worked, was I knew when I was going to have the bulk of the department, part-time and full-time. And I think it's really, really important that we don't, this is something I just need to say, it is absolutely vital that we don't just include full-time in these conversations. We have got to include our part-time in these conversations, and we have to pay those part-time faculty for their time when we do professional development for them, when we include them in. They must be able to be paid, because these are things that are above and beyond for them especially. So I just really want to encourage, you know, and I know that budgets aren't great right now and things are hard. So, you know, this is one of the things that we have to work with the state chancellor's office to encourage, and the governor to say, these are part of the things that need to happen. We need to be able to pay, and we need money, not just in one-time money that can be used over 2 or 3 years, but we need money that comes to us every single year, that where we can pay our part-time faculty for professional development, mentoring opportunities, because that's really how the change happens.
Thank you, Tammy. Bree, do you want to add? And then I want to bring in Anna Linda and Linda also. Do you want to add to anything to that?
Yeah, you know, I think I just, what I would say is what you probably heard from Tammy is that this is an iterative process. This wasn't one project and then we're done. This is a continued partnership that we have working with our faculty leaders. And so, you know, and it is, the math department is asking for data on a regular basis because they're engaging in inquiry as a department. We have the leadership of the dean, we have the leadership of the chair, that's very supportive of this. And I also just want to say that every college has a different culture around instructor level data. And so that's something to be mindful of. And I think it's also important for the institutional effectiveness or research office to make sure that that is kept in confidence, that they're able to create a very supportive, non-punitive, open space for faculty to really look at their data and privately, but as a cohort together, learning from their peers. Because otherwise it can feel punitive, or people might be very nervous to look at that disaggregated data. And so we have been doing this for a number of years, and math and English were really the first departments to engage as departments in this work. And I know you've heard a little bit about that from Tammy and Anna here, but we do have several communities of practice, everything from our Strong Workforce Faculty Institute to our Math and English communities of practice, our Equity-Minded Teaching and Learning Institute, Teaching Dialogues, Equitable Grading, many different professional learning experiences across our campus that really started, I mean, Tammy, correct me on this, but back when we had the Basic Skills Transformation Grant, you know, we began those communities of practice at that time, and we've really evolved, and we've been able to sustain as a college the inquiry, because we're constantly learning from these things. And I just want to give a shout out to the study, because I think, you know, as a very small institutional effectiveness office, you know, we know there's a lot of literature on the impact of individual employees, and particularly faculty members at a college, and the impact that has on our students. We saw it with our P group Student Support Redefined over a decade ago. We see that with instructor effects research that Mallory Newell has done, some of the references that have been already mentioned. We know that to be the case, and we hear it from students in focus groups. And we are able to evaluate a lot of our professional learning in terms of changing hearts and minds, and looking at pre-post, you know, comparisons of faculty members' behaviors and their perception, you know, after engaging in these learning communities together. But it's difficult sometimes to make that connection, really show how much of an impact these practices have on students in the classroom, and particularly students of color. So this study was super helpful for us to be a part of, and, you know, I think as a state for us to learn from. And so I just want to say that this has been, you know, it's something that I think a lot of colleges can really, you know, glean information from as they move forward and try to sustain this work, and creating communities of practice that are partnerships with institutional effectiveness as well.
I will, before handing it to Annalinda, I want to just highlight a couple of things that you and Tammy mentioned, that, you know, already you're answering my question about what is an effective community of practice. And one of the things that I'm hearing is it's data driven, you know, it's where you're working with your leadership, the chair, the dean are supportive, but, you know, institutional research is at the center of it. You know, they are completely included, not siloed. And the other things I'm hearing is, you know, faculty get their own data confidentially. It's a safe environment. It's not, there's no judgments. It's not evaluative. It's formative, as Annalinda mentioned, like we work with students. But then the learning is communal, right? Why are there large variations? What do we think the reasons might be? That is something we explore together in the community of practice. So those are just two things I wanted to highlight. Annalinda, did you want to add anything about being a faculty, a part of this community of practice? What makes them work?
Oh, I started as a part-timer, and so I didn't even know what a community of practice was. That's why I think it was so important when it was when Tammy mentioned to bring in your part-time faculty. I was like, talk about an untapped wealth of knowledge. They teach at multiple colleges. They go to different training sessions. So again, even though our college has training sessions, but they're going to other colleges too and getting different types of training. So having this like just wealth of knowledge and making sure that their voice and they're engaged and they're invited and then compensated for their time, because it is valuable and we respect that, is just matters so much. And it really does help change the culture of a department when you make it holistic that way and communal. But what makes it work? Well, it's funny. Yeah, again, I started as just being a person who is a part of it. And so watching the leadership, how do we guide? How do we norm and make our conversations productive? What's the center? What's the focus? What's our agenda? What's the goal? So trying to set up something where you're making sure that you're addressing the needs of your faculty, but then also addressing the needs of the students. So sometimes setting up the norms of like, okay, allow for faculty to have conversations, to talk about their students. And then when they start to complain about it, then it's like, I'm watching this person redirect that energy, where instead of, you can see that sometimes we get so passionate or we get so involved in our work that sometimes we take it too personal and think like, it's not an attack on me if a student is having a hard time or if a student's struggling. It's instead of looking at the behavior, trying to understand the context behind it. So watching our leadership literally help us, like guide us through that process of being more asset minded. What does the student bring? What are they dealing with? Instead of judging the behavior, trying to understand the motivation behind it. So really getting us more engaged on like, okay, more effective. How do we make this change? How do I address this? How do I approach the student? And it's really great because in this community of practice, we're not judging each other. We're just trying to help each other. So when these things come up, it's wonderful to like with that guided type of community of practice, you can kind of see all of the faculty members kind of, circle around each other that, oh, you're having this, we'll try this technique and this strategy and this, where it gives you something that you can be authentic to yourself as an instructor, but still serve your students.
Thank you, Anna. I want to ask the last question since we're running out of time, and then I know Myra has a couple of announcements also. Linda, this question is for you. You work at a large college. You work at Pasadena. Institutionalizing things at a large college in many ways are harder. Can you give us a couple of examples about folks who are from large colleges? What are some things that are actionable?
Well, so, I mean, one of the things that we've done recently, and I had no role in it, I can take no credit for it, but we use Canvas as our online learning environment, and some other faculty got together and made a e-syllabus with all the information about where to get help, including our food pantry and our student health center, things like that, not just where the math tutoring center is, but where all the tutoring centers are, where all the different types of help are on campus. And so that every student can get this same messaging over and over again, because a one and done sort of message to our students is not effective, especially during the first week. They get too much thrown at them. Very little of it sticks. So by having it very easy for faculty to message students with all of these things, then it becomes a campus-wide message and not just a one faculty member here or there giving them these messages. So our standard syllabus in Canvas, and even, I mean, I hate Zoom, nothing personal, but I teach all my classes face-to-face, but I still use Canvas a lot. It's a great way to communicate with my students. And so, I still am using that e-syllabus. So that's one thing that is an easy way to sort of start to push the institution in these directions. Anything where people are working together and sharing resources. So again, in Canvas, we have faculty access to, the stats shell, where anybody who teaches stats can add, activities or things like that. So it's very easy for us to share resources across the department, because we are 45 full-time faculty and probably slightly more than that adjuncts. And so, it is hard to get everybody all together in one place. But if you're really wanting to motivate faculty, one thing that we found, I think, to be very successful is having student panels. Oh, it's my automatic cat feeder, sorry about that. But having student panels, because hearing it from me is one thing, but hearing it from their students really has a huge impact. So student panels are super great way to get faculty involved. And I think it's important to realize, like myself, my training was all in pure mathematics. I have no training in pedagogy or teaching, and so to recognize that, this is not my strong suit and that I'm open to help. I'm open to learning, just like my students need to be open to learning.
Thank you. Wonderful. I want to just thank our panel. Just your insights are amazing. We do have 2 more minutes. I'd love to pass the mic to Myra. Sam, please share the last slide, because that way you can hear about the other amazing CAP webinars. Again, thank you so much to our panelists and to all the colleges that are doing this work and are going to be engaging in this work. Myra.
Yes, thank you so much for presenting today, and thanks to everyone who came. As closing remarks, I wanted to make sure everyone knows our website, accelerationproject.org, and under publications, you will find a link to the slides for today's presentation and a webinar recording within a week. I also wanted to highlight that many of the themes that surfaced in this study as correlated with improved outcomes for Black and Hispanic students have to do with creating a sense of belonging, of having students understand that you care about them and their learning. And if you want to see work that CAP has done on this last spring, check out the publication called Check In So Students Don't Check Out. And this has connected to a professional development resources that will help you facilitate conversations within your department and with your colleagues around simple routines like how to check in with your students. We have 2 more events in this webinar series this fall. If you haven't registered for those, you can find them under events on our website. And I wanted to emphasize that, you know, we all got this one-time allocation, the $64 million that's connected to AB 1705 implementation. And much of that money in the 5 categories, spending categories that are allowed, are connected to professional development, equity-based work with math and English faculty. So I encourage you to these events that we have planned this semester are not only about research-based findings, but they are directly connected to professional development resources. So if you're trying to put together a community of practice, or if you are even just trying to lead flex activities, the webinars 2 and 3 have very specific facilitation guides that you can use to help create conversations and work within your department that is related to the findings of Education Equity Solutions study that we heard about today. So that said, thank you again for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday and your weekend. Thanks so much.